we're not going to have time to go around and introduce everybody, but please note that the meeting is being recorded. If you're not comfortable being seen on the video, you can turn off your video. You can also mute yourself. You should be muted automatically when you come into the meeting. So in the chat function, if you could let us know where you're from and your name so that we can all see who is in this meeting here with us. I'll also note we have a pretty large crowd here today, so just to keep things simple and make sure that we're not talking over each other, if you have a question or you'd like to make a comment, you can just use the raise hand function, and myself or one of my colleagues from CHAPA will take a note. You can also always make comments, share materials, or share questions in the chat function. So there will be a lot of us managing that. All right. I also want to note that we're streaming live on Facebook, and we'll be sharing all of the materials from this session on our website. And you can see many of the resources that we'll be sharing are already up on the website for you to view at chapa.org. All right. So I'm going to, one second, I'm going to share my screen here. So we'll get started. All right, so a head nod from folks. Can you see my screen? Great. All right, so as I said, we're here at the CHAPA regional meeting for Franklin, Hampden, and Hampshire counties. My name is Dana LeWinter. I am the Director of Municipal Engagement for CHAPA. Thank you all for being here. CHAPA, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, our mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing that's affordable to low and moderate income families and foster diverse and sustainable communities. We do a lot of stuff beyond these regional meetings, so I would encourage you to go to our website to learn about how we do the work and who we partner with. I want to thank our annual regional meeting sponsor, Bank of America. They've been sponsoring this meeting for a couple years now, and we really would not be able to do this work without their support. So thank you very much to Bank of America. And also thank you to our local participating co-hosts. We're going to hear from these folks later on in the meeting. But really, this is a regional meeting, and the reason we want to have local co-hosts is because they know the region better than anyone. They are connected to all of you. They're doing the work on the ground, and we really value their voice in this conversation, and we learn a lot from these regional meetings. So thank you so much. I'm going to go through the agenda in just a second, but before I do that, Whitney Demetrius, my colleague in the Municipal Engagement Initiative, is going to run a short little survey/poll to get us started. So I'll hand it off to Whitney.
Thanks, Dana, and hopefully everyone can see that. I'll look for some head nod indicators just to note that you are able to see that. And it's just a series of questions. Feel free to answer as best you can, and then we'll go over some of the answers to help maybe guide some of our conversation today. So just give you a few minutes to complete, and then we will go over.
And so as we're waiting, as a reminder for folks who are joining us just now, in the chat, you can tell us your name, you can tell us where you're from, if you're from a community, if you live in a community in the 3 counties for this regional meeting, or if you represent an organization. We're going to hear a little bit about where you guys all represent as part of this poll. So thank you very much for taking part in that. And I also want to remind folks there are right answers to this poll/survey, but if you don't know the answer, just answer the best that you can. We're going to go over all of these resources in just a second. All right, so Whitney, is the poll still running?
Yeah, we have about 10% complete, so I'll give another minute or so, and I will call it and go through the answers.
I lost the poll. I started it and it disappeared.
It may have minimized on your screen. If you check, you may see that it may have minimized. Okay, great.
If other folks are having problems, let us know.
Yeah, hopefully you were able to find that, Denise.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is for Avery. I don't see a poll either anywhere on my screen.
Others, or is everyone else? Is anyone else not seeing it? I can see that about 50% of you guys have completed it.
Okay.
So it seems like
Well,
at least some have.
why don't
It
we
may
go
be
ahead and,
because she's a co-host, she can't see it. So the same way that Dana can't see it as well, maybe that.
yeah, let's go ahead and just close it and we can give you the answers. It's okay if you haven't been able to participate.
All right, so I'll go over some of those questions. So the first question was, who do you represent? And so we're excited to see pattern in some of our regional meetings that we've been doing. Many of you all represent local community organizations, but we're excited to see that some of you are from local municipalities, statewide organizations, residents, consultants, and others. So happy to have so many of you on our call today. The second question comes from the American List. What percentage of American renters and households were unable to make their payments in May of 2020? That was actually 22%. Many of you all got that right. 22% of rental households. And the second question was referring to homeowner households. I may have typed that wrong, but that was the second question, was 22% as well. 22% were unable to make their rental payments, their household payments in May of 2020. The next following question, the fourth question, is according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston Impacts Report, which we'll share a link for you all to find out more about if you haven't already heard about it. How many New England households are at risk of missing their rent or mortgage payment due to coronavirus-related job loss? That was actually more than 1 million households, which is really remarkable, more than 1 million households. From that same report, the following question talks about New England homeowners and renters report under the best case scenario, how much housing payments is likely to accrue in New England from April through July. So they're estimating how many, under the best case scenario, $1.42 billion. Many of you all got that right. The number is really striking, but hopefully, again, it leads, that data really can guide some of the conversations we're having locally and also throughout the region. The next question was, according to the MAPC update to the COVID-19 layoff housing gap report, what percentage of standard unemployment claims came from just these three fields: food preparation and serving, office and administrative support, and sales? And let's see, many of you all got that correct. That was actually 40%. Just those three occupations, represent 40%. And then have many of you all joined us in the past for CHAPA regional meetings? Many of you all have 64%, so we're excited to see you all back. And for those who it's your first time, we're excited to have you here with us, joining us, seeing this as really an opportunity, being in the virtual space to meet with you all. So thank you, and I'll hand it back over to Dana.
Thank you, Whitney. So a lot of the stats that Whitney was sharing come from reports. We're going to be sharing those in the chat. So we're going to get going on our agenda. So just to walk you through it briefly, we're going to hear from some of our partner organizations. Then we're going to hear a policy update both on the state and federal level from our policy team. We're going to hear a little bit about our municipal engagement initiative, and then we're going to do some regional sharing and have some discussion time. And then we'll let you know how you can stay involved with upcoming meetings, events, and other ways to stay connected with us. So we're going to hand it over to our regional updates from our partner organizations. I'm going to stop my sharing so that you guys can see the speakers. And so first off, we are going to start with, how about we start with Denise Jordan? She is from the Springfield Housing Authority. I can see Denise there. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So to report on what we've been experiencing that is COVID-19 related, is that we're happy to say that our tenants were probably under 10%, closer to maybe 5% in terms of those residents that did not pay their rent early on. We made sure we sent out communications to let folks know that you know, all of the messaging they were hearing was being translated into, we don't have to pay rent. And so we made sure we sent out communications to let them know what it really meant. It's like, you know, you don't pay now, you got to pay later. And so to our surprise, actually, our tenants have been very good. So we haven't had a lot of problems at all in terms of rent being paid. Those rents that were not paid were specifically those residents that were already frequent flyers, that we already had issues with getting rent being paid on time. In regards to just our operations, we've done very well having staff work from home some days, but for the most part, everyone has been coming into work at least once or twice a week since probably, I'm going to say April. We went down to reduce schedules because some of our offices and our departments, specifically Section 8, they have to work in the office. So we've been able to keep those offices and the whole SHA operating pretty much as usual. So we were lucky that we really haven't experienced any hardships because of COVID-19, other than residents wanting to come in to the buildings and talk to their caseworkers and or to talk to their district staff. One of the issues that we are experiencing is that some of the residents, specifically our seniors, are getting a little antsy. A lot of the community senior centers are still closed. All of our community rooms are closed, and they want to get back in there because they want to socialize. We haven't been given permission from DHCD or HUD to reopen those spaces. So we have to kind of keep that in their heads. It's like, it's not us being mean, but we're not allowed to open. One of the other issues that we've been having is regarding the reopening guidelines that have been issued from the state, working through DHCD. It's been a little problematic for us because, as you all know, the governor issued a 25% occupancy. And here at the Housing Authority, we have more than enough space to accommodate all of our staff. Most of our staff here have their own private offices. And there are other housing authorities across the Commonwealth that have the same issue. They can accommodate more, but the law says we can't. So we're trying to figure out how we can work around that to see if there's some guidance or some policies that can be made housing authorities specific, because housing authorities have never been addressed in any of the phases to reopen. So we're kind of waiting on that information from DHCD. And finally, the only other issue that we have is staff wanting to return to work after having the luxury of working from home and receiving a full paycheck. Now that they've been working from home, a lot of them want to stay at home. And so with the Child Care Act that's been issued by the federal government, there's a pattern in just in really one department. Folks can't seem to get child care on Fridays. So that's what we're working. I've talked to other organizations. I talked to some staff at City Hall, and that seems to be sort of trending. So I'm curious to see at some of your organizations if you're having that same problem with staff not wanting to return back to work and trying to come up with their own alternative schedules that work best for them and using childcare as an issue. And that's the update from Springfield Housing Authority.
Thank you so much, Denise. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and also for sharing that with us. Thanks so much. So we're going to go to, let's see, John Hornick. Are you here from the Amherst Affordable Housing Coalition and Affordable Housing Trust? I thought I saw you, John. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I think I just did.
Great.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I am here. Glad to be here. I'll give just a brief report. The biggest thing that we're doing is, as of July 6th, we are going to kick off an emergency rental assistance fund in Amherst. I know a lot of other communities around the Commonwealth are doing that as well. So we're not the first, but we're probably among the earlier communities to do that. We've put in really through CPA funding that the trust has had banked for a year or two, enough money, $250,000, we hope, to be able to serve probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 households. The fund will be administered by the Community Action of the Pioneer Valley Agency. as I said, they already are contracted to do the administration, and the program will officially start as of July 6th. At that point, people will be able to apply for funding. They can receive up to 3 months of funding initially, and we'll see how the money lasts beyond that. We've also made it a priority to fund households with children, and at least 70% of the funding will go to that group. If we have more applications than we can serve, then we'll use a lottery method for selecting them. There'll be 2 enrollment periods, one, as I said, kicking off on July 6th, and the second one probably about 6 weeks later. We've done that so that if people miss the initial period because they haven't heard about it or they don't have enough time to get a full application in, there'll be a second opportunity. And so we'll limit the total funding available in the first period so we have additional funds available then. So that's just a quick update, Dana. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, John. And it looks much cooler where you are than where the rest of us, I assume, are this hot day. Thank you very much.
My summer, my winter photograph. It's not actually we're in Amherst right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it. So next we'll go to the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. I believe we have Alyssa LaRose, or if any of the other folks, Peggy Sloan or Phoebe Walker from there want to join to speak. If you could unmute yourself, that would be great.
Hi. So I know Peggy couldn't make it, but I'm happy to talk. So I'm Alyssa LaRose. I'm a senior planner at the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. We serve as the regional planning agency for Franklin County. And so we, in terms of housing, we tend to work on the kind of planning and development side of things and not so much, you know, on the service side. So I'm really here today to listen to what all of you have to say about what's going on. I know that there's concerns in our region about a potential cliff effect coming up in the fall when benefits and other protections might fall off at the same time. We have continual issues with housing, not having enough decent, affordable housing in our region. There's barriers to accessing that housing, whether it's a need for landlord education or you know, more rehab funds, things like that. So there's a lot of ongoing work that we know needs to happen. But mainly I'm here to listen, to hear from all of you who are really working on the front lines to hear what's happening. So I'm hoping some of you from Franklin County will be willing to share. So thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. So next we're going to go to Franklin County Regional Housing and Redevelopment Authority. I believe Gina Gavani has joined us, and I hope you were able to make it in. Gina, are you there?
I'm here, Dana. Thank you. Sorry to be a couple of minutes late. I was able to join you guys on the Facebook stream before I actually got in, so I didn't miss much.
Good.
But anyway, I just want to thank Alyssa for her work and her partnership in Franklin County. And just to speak a little bit to what we're seeing on the front lines in housing, well, also, I want to echo what Denise said and just say that like the residents down in Springfield, our public housing residents are in large part paying rent and complying with requests to pay rent. There has been some lateness, particularly at the beginning of this moratorium, but we have seen a big correction. I think one of the biggest trends that we've seen from month to month that's most startling, but again, the reason why the Section 8 program works is that it does offer those opportunities for interim recertifications as income goes up and down. And we have seen almost a 6 to 7% increase and decrease from month to month between March, April, May, and June rent rolls to landlords for voucher payments. So it's been more significant than we've seen at any other time in the last few years in terms of month-to-month transition. But that's not unexpected given the loss of income and then getting unemployment benefits. So we're continuing to work with tenants on interim recertifications. When we first started this pandemic and shut down, we were a little worried about rehab and homeowner rehab. As of June, we have seen that our projects, particularly the external projects, but now also projects that are going inside of homeowners' homes, are resuming pace and now mirroring where we were in June of 2019. So that is really encouraging. Let's see. One other piece I just want to add out there. We are also starting a CPA emergency rental assistance program in addition to RAFT, but specifically for the town of Sunderland. And so that program is going to go live on July 1st. And we're happy to be offering that program. Again, it's very similar to what John mentioned. It's 3 months of assistance, up to 3 months of assistance, but there are going to be more details available on our website soon. And I think that's it for me for now.
Thank you so much, Gina. I appreciate it. And so lastly, we're going to hear from Wayfinders. Peter, are you on the call? I believe you were able to join us. Peter Gagliardi. You can unmute yourself. Are you there?
We'll make that work. There we go.
Ah, there he is. Okay, great. You made it.
So thank you. Thank you. Glad to be able to give folks a quick update. A lot of things have been happening here at Wayfinders in addition to things like COVID-19. But perhaps the biggest thing is RAFT and RAFT-like resources that are intended to keep people from becoming evicted or foreclosed upon. In addition to some additional money, federal money that's coming down through DHCD, and that's a significant amount of money statewide, about $20 million. And there's also been an award from the city of Springfield of $2 million from their federal resources to be used specifically for residents, some for homeowners who are having trouble with their mortgage payments, and the bulk of it for tenants who are in difficulty because of losses that they've incurred due to the coronavirus. So that's exciting and a significant increase in the level of that kind of resource, which we hope will meet the need. Ultimately, my goal would be that no family or household lost their housing through either eviction or foreclosure because of a loss of employment or a loss of health due to the coronavirus. And that's really the ultimate goal. Anybody that can think back to 10 years ago when we had a huge foreclosure problem, what kind of damage was done to many communities and on a wholesale basis to cities like Springfield. But also I know it also hit hard in some of the smaller towns where there were a lot of bad mortgages that went belly up back then. We do not want that to happen. It's not good. For starters, it's not good for the family or the household. It's certainly also not good for the neighborhood or the community. And it's important that that we use these resources to help folks. So if you've got somebody that you know that needs that kind of assistance in Hampden or Hampshire County in general for our RAFT program, or in the city of Springfield, please don't hesitate to send them in. They may apply online. We have an assessment form that people fill out as the first step, and that helps us understand which of the different resources we have they might be eligible for. so that we don't send somebody down a track that's not going to end in success. We want to help everybody that falls within the parameters of our programs. I think there will be more money yet. The estimate that was used early in this process for the state was a need for a minimum of $50 million in RAF-like money. That compares to $20 million a year for the regular program. And I'm afraid we're going to be seeing that kind of fallout as we go through the next 6 months. At Wayfinders itself, we've had a few other things going on. Some of our staff are now working out of our new office building at the site of the former Peter Pan terminal in Springfield. When all of this came down in March, our staff really moved immediately to remote locations, and we were able to continue working in that fashion. The systems in place continue to improve in terms of communication with clients or potential clients, but starting from our website is a good place for people to go. There are phone numbers. We do answer the phone. When we can't get the call immediately, we make calls back. Again, for RAF, there is the opportunity to come in electronically. And then the last little bit of news, some of you may be aware that as of a week from today, I will be finishing up my career at Wayfinders and handing over the job of president and CEO to Keith Ferry, who will be actually starting on July 6th. So I've enjoyed working with many of you that I know, and I guess I will have missed working with some of you that I don't know. But we've had a lot going on here. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter, both for sharing what you're doing and also your years of work. I know that we will miss you at CHAPA, but we actually don't let people go very far, even when they retire. So you'll be hearing from us, I'm sure.
Thank you.
As you know. And yes, I'm seeing lots of congratulations for you in the chat, and I think we echo that as well. So there were a couple of questions in the chat about emergency rental assistance programs, and I see that some folks were having difficulty downloading. There is a list of where emergency rental assistance programs are popping up locally. You can also find that on our website, and we will also share all of those materials. But as Peter was saying and others were saying, there are many state and regional resources as well. So please don't hesitate. We've been talking a lot lately about every door should be the right door to get assistance. No, we don't want anyone to not get assistance if they need it. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Just give me 1 second. And I'm going to hand it over to Abidnia Curve, my colleague at CHAPA, to talk about our state policy updates. So Abi, go for it.
Thanks, Dana. I'm Abidnia Curve. I go by Abi. I'm the policy associate and work with our policy team, Eric and Ryan at CHAPA. And a large part of what we do is sort of, get a lot of input from our members and work on policy solutions that can really help make sure that people in Massachusetts have a safe place to call home. And as we have, gone into this crisis, we have recalculated our priorities and made sure that what is needed in this moment and now to ensure that people have a safe home to shelter in place, that we are doing everything to make that possible. And so in that sense, we had a whole set of priorities, but have now worked on priorities that are specific for COVID response and recovery. And in doing that, there is a lot that we have been working on, but I would just like to highlight a few things that have been our focus of our advocacy. Next slide. Thanks, Dana. And so our approach in doing this has been making sure that the policies that we are advocating are equitable and they ensure housing stability. And we are working to make sure that tenants are supported, homeowners are supported, and in overall the housing ecosystem is stabilized during this time and going forward for recovery as well. And so in terms of our advocacy priorities, one of the main priorities has been RAFT. As Peter pointed out, that RAFT has been such a critical program to provide housing assistance, and that goes way beyond what federal assistance is providing. So there are many populations not covered by the federal assistance that can be covered by RAFT, and so it has become a really important program in the state. We have been advocating for a $50 million appropriation for that, and it was just a starting out number by some of our projections. We definitely expect that it may be a much higher number as we go ahead. We have advocated for increasing the assistance amount from $4,000 to $10,000, because as people accrue a couple of months of back rent, the $4,000 amount may not be enough, and that's what we have been advocating for. And also to expand it below the 50% AMI. Right now it is available for up to 50% AMI, and we are advocating for it to go up to 80%. There have been a couple of programs that have been proposed, and in any which way that is achieved, we'd be happy to ensure that, but we do understand that much higher people beyond 50% are also really in need of housing assistance. And the HCECs, which are sort of the frontline agencies to provide that assistance, making sure that there is enough resources for staffing those agencies so that they can help households. And so we are advocating for a $6.25 million funding for those as well. And I'm happy, and as Peter pointed out, there has been some progress on that front. There was a supplemental budget filed by the governor for FY 2020. And in that budget, 20 million have been proposed from the House side for RAFT and some money for HCEC funding. And it'll be our effort to make sure that the Senate has those numbers and maybe even higher, and that gets passed and we get those funds out of the door. And I'll speak more about how you guys can help in that advocacy and support that effort. What we're also working on is one thing that we realize is, as we are struggling with the state revenues, there is a lot of federal funding that is coming in. And if we can match up the programs that are really in need of resources with the federal funding that is coming in, that would be, one of the best things that we can achieve right now. And specifically what CHAPA has been working on currently is coordinating federal resources like ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grants, and I'll let Ryan talk about that a little bit more, but making sure we marry those federal funds to programs that are in need of resources and leverage those funds where state funds may fall short. One of the legislations that was already proposed before COVID was right to counsel, full legal representation in eviction proceedings. What we are advocating right now is a pilot program on that, which will specifically help tenants and owner occupants whose incomes are at a certain level, because we do expect that as the moratorium ends, there might be a huge wave of evictions that might be coming in, and so anything that helps to sort of prevent that, we are going at it with like housing assistance resources, but also legal representation to sort of avoid that situation, or at least stabilize some tenancies. And not to let our eye off the housing choice legislation, which would lower the threshold for voting some of the zoning ordinances in town meetings. We are trying to also make sure that conversation is outgoing, and especially with the whole focus around racial equity. If we are looking at racial equity, housing justice is also part of that, and making sure that communities open up to people of color, people of various incomes, that can be achieved through housing choice legislation, and we are making sure that we keep that conversation going as well. And so those are our sort of legislative priorities. There is a lot of budget priorities that we have been advocating for to make sure those funds are available for many households that are going to need those resources. And in that sense, in the supplemental budget, we have been advocating for some money for the public housing authorities. Even in the House budget, that seems to be reflective of that. Money for homeless shelters, and also permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness with specific needs. And there's a whole host of priorities that we have been working on on the supplemental budget side for the FY 2021 budget, the process for which is not yet very clear, but seems like the governor has also put out an interim budget. So there will be some sort of a shorter term budget and maybe not an entire year budget. That is what we expect. And making sure that we have some money even for permanent supportive housing, as I talked about. So those are some of the things we have been focusing on, but there's a whole host of other things we have been doing. And I'll post some links on our list of priorities and other things that we have been working on, with a caveat that these things change. And so we keep updating our priorities as things move forward and as they change. And I'll talk more about how you can contribute to these things, but for now I'll head it off to Ryan for federal updates.
Thank you, Abhi. So yes, I'm Ryan Dominguez, Policy Analyst at CHAPA, and I help to coordinate the federal policy work on behalf of the New England Housing Network as well. So the New England Housing Network is a broad coalition of affordable housing organizations in each of the New England states. And together we've been advocating down in DC for various housing and homelessness relief to be included in both the CARES Act, as well as the proposal that came out of the House, which was known as the HEROES Act. And we'll continue to advocate down in DC for additional funding that can come out through any kind of stimulus package. Outside of that, we've turned our attention to what we can do here on the state and local level, and we focused on 3 areas of funding that came from the CARES Act. The first was the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF. The second was the Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG. And lastly were the Emergency Solutions Grants. To give you kind of an overview, the Coronavirus Relief Fund can be used for things like emergency rental assistance, as well as gap financing for new affordable housing developments. And it was the biggest pool of money that Massachusetts has received thus far. As you'll see on the slide, we received $2.7 billion from the CRF. And about 25%, or $502 million, went directly to cities and towns. So to give you kind of a local snapshot, you'll see here that Springfield received around 13.6 million, Northampton received around 2.5 million, and Greenfield received around 1.5 million. The second source of funding is CDBG. CDBG can be used for things like 3 months of rental assistance, as well as paying for housing counseling programs. And the Commonwealth has received around $86 million from CDBG. To again give you a local snapshot, Springfield received around $2.3 million for CDBG, and Northampton received around $400,000 for CDBG. Lastly, there's the ESG program, which can be used for supporting shelter costs as well as funding rapid rehousing. And the Commonwealth received around $104 million, and close to $60 million of this total went to entitlement communities. So Springfield received close to $5 million for ESG. So these are all really great funding sources that went directly to cities and towns. And I'll add 2 documents into the chat that kind of outline the different allocations to the cities and towns. And before I kick it back to Abhi to talk about what you can do now, I'll just say from the federal perspective, I really think that as local advocates, you really want to talk with your local municipal officials and try to get them to have a public process for the allocation of these funds, whether it's a RFP process or having meetings with your local officials to kind of influence on where these funding sources are going. I would say really try to prioritize funding for housing and homelessness, because we really do not know whether there's going to be another funding package, and we need to use the sources that we have right now to fill in any gaps that we might have on the state level. So with that, I'll kick it back to Abhi.
Thanks, Ryan. And what can you do now? I mean, as Ryan correctly pointed out, there's a lot going on in the local level, and it is really helpful if we can sort of, get plugged into that conversation and, engage to have not just have a public process, but also ensure that there is more coordination between those resources, and those local funds can be used to fill up gaps. For example, as it was brought up, there are some CPA funds that are used for rental assistance. There's also federal funding, and then there is RAFT. So if we can make sure that there is a coordination between these and they sort of help, fill up the gaps, which, one program is not able to provide and the other one does, that would be the, most effective solution. And so we have a letter that you can use sort of as a template to reach out to your municipal officials and ask them to get input from members of the community and just be plugged into that conversation. And I'll send those links right away. On the state level, it is best to contact your legislator and ask them to expand RAFT. We have gotten some indication that there is a willingness to do that from the House side, but any sort of advocacy to keep this, ongoing, because no matter what other things we have, moratoriums and things, eventually that rent needs to be paid, and RAFT in that sense is going to be really, really critical. So please do advocate for that funding. Also, on a larger level, CHAPA has a lot of committees that are focused on different topics where we discuss on the budget of homelessness prevention, housing stability, public housing and rental assistance. And if you are able to provide us input, if you're able to be in that conversation and have that voice, it really helps make our advocacy more strong and more comprehensive. So if you're able to plug into those committees, which you can join on, and with Zoom, it has been really helpful to just sort of sign on and have these meetings. It'll be really great if you are all able to join, and we can get a much better picture of what's going on and how can we help. So please do check out our website for joining these committees, and I'll share the materials in just a second. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhi and Ryan. That was really helpful. And I noted it in the chat, but if you press the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat, you can save all those resources, or you can just go straight to our website. We've already had 4 regional meetings, and most of these resources are up there. Although, as Abhi mentioned, these things are changing quickly, rapidly. They're doing a lot of work. So just a note. And so we're going to move on to Whitney Demetrius to hear a little bit about our municipal engagement initiative. I promise you all we're getting close to the conversation part of this meeting, so stick with us. Thanks, Whitney.
Thanks, Dana. So I'll be quick in my remarks because I really do want to have the opportunity to hear from all of you. The Municipal Engagement Initiative, our goal really is to build support for affordable housing production in communities across Massachusetts. And so the idea is that local support can really make or break new housing development. And the irony, though, there is that there aren't always many strong advocacy groups for housing already in those communities. And so our goal really is to think about different strategies to support the efforts in each community to build a culture that welcomes housing, including specifically affordable housing opportunities. So we do this by bolstering efforts to expand housing opportunities, as well as growing the number of people supporting housing production in each group. Sort of getting in each community, right? Getting them to think outside of the box as far as who the stakeholders are in that community, to really think about who's important to bring to the table, to expand the voice, right? Make those voices louder and more impactful. So our program has been in place since about 2018, and we've really been in several different communities at this point, 9. So including Amherst, in Acton, Arlington, Medford, Newton, Essex, Foxborough, Lynn, and Revere. And as you can see, many of those communities are very different. And so our approach in those communities are different because each community is unique, right, in terms of size, structure of local government, et cetera. And so our goal really, though, is to help support them in thinking about how they can expand the voices around housing issues and how they overlapped often with other issues, right? Housing is healthcare, we know, but the goal being to make sure that folks have a sustainable, accessible, healthy place to call home. So where do you start? How can you sort of get this going in your community if you don't already have one? The idea being to identify who your core folks are who are already doing the work, think outside the box about who those partners are, begin having those conversations, use the data to sort of guide your discussions, and just get started, right? Have a launching event. What we've done on our website in our MEI Lite toolkit was sort of create a template for you to guide you through how you might get started, right? Currently, we have 2 MEI Lite communities, Agawam and Brookline, where we came in to help them to sort of launch their efforts, bring the stakeholders together, get started with a launch meeting, and start to begin to do this work. And they've already been doing such great things. So samples to agendas and how to do this work is on our website. So we encourage you to join us and checking that out, as well as telling us where you live. So what we love to do is be able to connect neighbors. So go on that site. What you can do is tell us where you live, and we can let you know who in your community is also interested in doing this work, so that you can begin to identify that core and kind of get the work started. So again, Dana and I are here to help you, sort of break the silos of the great work you're doing individually, but really to pull you out together to sort of set the table to do some great work. So I'll hand it back over to Dana, because we really do want to spend much of our time hearing from you, and she's going to talk a little bit more about a data dive, which will guide our conversation.
Thank you, Whitney. That was great. I see at least one person saying they'd love to do this in South Hadley. So yes, reach out to us. We'd be happy to chat with you about how to do that. So we're getting close. I just want to share a little bit of data, digging in a little bit deeper to some of the poll questions that Whitney had started us off on this conversation with. So I'm going to share just a little bit here. This is from the COVID Community Data Lab. This is a wealth of information related to COVID and housing and equity and economic development. So I just want to raise a couple of things. Looking at Springfield as an example community for you all in this region, we're looking at where are there higher levels of COVID right now, and what are some of the factors that might impact that. So Springfield has a case rate, I believe it's 171 per 10,000 residents as of June 3rd. Some of the things that have been shown to be correlated with higher rates of COVID are overcrowding. Springfield has a rate of overcrowding of 4%. 50% of residents are frontline workers in Springfield, which is again shown to be correlated, and 68% residents of color. That's what you're looking at here. And you can see Springfield actually has a lower rate than would be expected on this chart. So, that's something to keep in mind, but it's also where you might potentially expect to see some increases in the rates of COVID. Springfield also has a percentage of 29% of households in poverty, which has been shown to be related to that. These are all vulnerable communities or groups that we want to make sure we're paying attention to. We've seen that often when residents are in subsidized affordable housing, when they're safely housed, there may not be as much of a correlation between some of these factors. So just keeping that in mind as you guys are doing your work and responding. Whitney had shared at the beginning that 22% of households were unable, both renter and homeowner households were unable to make their rent payments in May. But if we dig a little bit deeper, we see that lower income households are less likely to have made those payments. And this again is, we understand that's why, because people were already in a bit of housing instability going into COVID-19 with job loss and income loss. You can see much more likely to have not been able to make a payment or made a partial payment. What that means is when the eviction moratorium is up, if they've not been able to get access to rental assistance, there's going to be a big bill due, and we want to keep that on top of our minds as we have these conversations. And going forward, I think this is the one that is most concerning to me, that less than half of surveyed renters and homeowners believe they could afford their current housing costs for the next 3+ months. So we need to be thinking about what's next. How are we assisting these folks? How are we making sure that when the eviction moratorium, the foreclosure moratorium is lifted, people have the ability to stay in their homes? This is from the MAPC COVID-19 Layoff Housing Gap Report. I want to share some statewide information, and I also want to let you folks know that they just released, everyone's been anxiously awaiting some of this data on a municipality level. So if you go to their website, if you take a look at the link that we've shared in the chat, you don't do it now, I want your attention, but it's really great. There's a map where you can actually click on each community and see the level of need. So obviously there's a huge amount of need, even with the expanded CARES Act unemployment benefits. You can see 7,800 renter households, 7,700 owner households are having trouble paying for their basic needs, which results in a $13.8 million monthly cost to keep them up to date on their rent or mortgage. Even after all of these, that's with all of those extra pieces of assistance. When those end, the situation is going to become much worse. And so you can see they've estimated, who will have trouble paying their rent, what amount of assistance will be needed, a statewide assistance gap of $195 million monthly. I looked at the numbers for Springfield, again, going back to Springfield, there were almost 11,000 unemployment claims in Springfield, according to their data. 2,900 households who will need assistance, and that results in about 2.5 million needed in housing assistance. So just to give you the depth of what we're looking at here. So I encourage you to take a look at that. So I want to share just a couple of the regional topics that we had been talking with our co-hosts about, so that when we get into discussion, this is top of mind for you. Obviously, we've heard a lot here about the emergency rental assistance programs, but what happens after the moratorium is lifted, unemployment ends, how are we going to ensure people are getting those resources? And also, what's people's ability to access those funds? Definitely language barriers has been raised as an issue. Ability to access forms online or fill forms out online, that has been cited as problematic for some communities. Certainly, undocumented immigrants have been having additional struggles in this moment, and we've heard from some of our co-hosts and community partners that undocumented immigrants both are not aware that they are eligible for assistance, but are also nervous about applying for assistance because they aren't necessarily familiar or feel safe with the resources that are being offered. So making sure that we elevate the needs of undocumented immigrants in this moment. We definitely have heard concerns about people who are doubled up in homes. As you saw, overcrowding is one of the factors that has led to higher rates of COVID-19. But also, if you're doubled up and you maybe are feeling under the weather, are you protected to keep that roof over your head? Do you feel safe living in your home? So that's an issue. We've heard a little bit about people from the city or from the more urban areas wanting to buy homes out in more rural communities and putting some pressure by purchasing second homes. Is that going to put further pressure on the housing market? Definitely concerns about long-term planning and zoning. Are we able to continue doing these things as we meet virtually? Are communities able to continue moving forward with their affordable housing efforts, which we know we so desperately need while we're responding to COVID-19? Senior and congregate housing, I have it listed here, can be done with low rates. I think what I'm trying to say here is that we've seen when there is well-managed senior housing, when there is well-managed congregate housing, when there's well-managed subsidized housing, it doesn't necessarily relate to higher COVID-19 rates. And so how do we encourage more of that? How do we make sure that we're supporting those property owners? Always in this moment, we're thinking about housing as healthcare and really trying to have conversations about our role in racial equity. We know that zoning, fair housing, access to homes, affordability is so wrapped up in our conversations about racial equity right now. We want to make sure that you all are having those conversations in your communities as well. So I am going to move on to our discussion. I have a long laundry list of questions here. Where do we go from here? What's your top concerns? Are the resources that we've talked about filling the gaps? Are there other gaps that you see? How do you plan to continue to address your needs? All that to say, we want to hear from you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to allow you all to start speaking. If you could just raise your hand, I can call on you. I did see in the chat before we got to this a couple of folks, so maybe I'll call on them first if they want to. So first I had heard from Deborah McLaughlin. She was talking about some work that the Opioid Task Force has been doing on congregate housing. Deborah, if you'd like to unmute yourself and speak, that would be great.
Here we go. Thanks so much, Dana and everyone. I see other colleagues from Franklin County, North Quabbin on the call as well. So hopefully they'll be able to chime in too if time allows. We have been convening a task force focused on housing and workforce development for several years now, particularly focusing on the necessary need to increase access to sober housing, both in terms of developing sober housing and also connecting people to existing housing opportunities. We're finding, particularly for folks who are coming out of incarceration back to the community or other vulnerable populations, we also co-facilitate a work group with the Sheriff's Office on human trafficking and sexual exploitation. So we're finding during COVID-19 that there are a number of concerns we're seeing on the housing front based on these vulnerable populations. So we are working with organizations like Gamma that's been working closely with MJ Adams, who's from the city of Greenfield, and MJ, feel free to chime in here, where we've been able to, they've been able to, with support from a variety of places, kind of increase supportive sober housing in Greenfield, both for men and for women. But this is a huge, huge need in our community. So I value the information that's been shared today, both in terms of data and also funding sources, so that we can continue to advocate for people who are in recovery and also who need treatment options, particularly during this pandemic. The very conditions that are keeping people safe for COVID-19 is exacerbating the opioid crisis. So we're just trying to manage both of those things at the same time. But I know Alyssa's part of our group, as well as Gina and Amanda, Melanie. So there may be others. Mary, I see a number of people, Shondell from our region, so feel free to chime in, and Dottie, of course, as well from our team.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, if anyone else on the call wants to chime in or share any other pieces, that's a really important piece of the conversation that we all should be having. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome, because I know Jen in particular is here from the Sheriff's Office too, not to put Jen on the spot, but they do incredible work on the reentry team level too. So they're on the front lines, sort of seeing and experiencing some of these challenges.
Jen, do you want to respond? Not to put you on the spot as well, but feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be like negative Ninny, but I mean, it's been a constant challenge prior to the virus or not. It's even a tighter challenge now because some people weren't showing apartments, or other people were in fear of going out to look at apartments for obvious reasons, or lack of transportation has been an issue, but then even more lack of transportation due to the virus. So I notice there's a real gap, especially a person I have in mind right now that it's been months. When you're on a limited income, there's limited availability, especially in a certain price gap, especially if you're a single person and your income's not going to change. They're also in an area where you're like 57, so you're not old enough to get senior, but you're not young enough, you know what I mean? You're in that gap. So there's some gaps that we don't realize that certain people fit in that make it extra challenging, especially if recovery is an issue on top of that. So to house certain people that fall in these categories is astronomical. And it's great that we have RAFT as a support and all, but without someone being able to rent to them or find rentable options, the money is wonderful, but it doesn't serve as a purpose if we don't have a place to put them actually.
So that's an excellent, just to say quickly, that's an excellent point. We're hearing kind of some difficult stories where folks have a voucher, they can't find a place in time, then they lose their spot on the list, and then they have to start all over again. And that's just a really tough story to hear, particularly if they're trying to get unified with their kids, which is a whole other challenge. They have to have the apartment to get their kids back from DCF custody. So it's, I appreciate you raising it.
And to know you're going to wait years again, it's like, I'll get you on the senior list or congregate housing, and it's 2 years. And when you're 57 and single and a little bit disabled in recovery, what do you do with somebody like that? I mean?
Yeah. I see Shondell has raised her hand. Shondell, if you want to unmute yourself and speak, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi. So yes, I'm Shondell Diaz with Options Counselor for Stavros Center for Independent Living. One of my responsibilities as an options counselor is to try to assist my consumers to get them to where they have to go. And housing has been a very big issue since I started last year. I have a couple consumers who have been on the congregate waiting list for I don't know how long. And one consumer in particular, he's in a program where his time is running up, and because of the COVID situation, it's been a hassle. So housing is definitely a problem, and especially with the situation with the nursing homes. I primarily deal with that as well, trying to get people out of the nursing homes that are actually homeless right now. And some places won't allow for like a virtual tour or to do things virtually to get these people into housing. So it's really, really, really hard. Yeah,
thank you so much for sharing that, Shondell. I appreciate it. And I thank you, all of you, for raising this issue and putting it on our agenda because it hadn't been on the list. I really appreciate that. I wanted to go to Natalie Vicencio. You had asked a question earlier up in the chat about how we pressure municipalities to adopt an emergency rental assistance plan. And you've also shared a couple of thoughts about what you're seeing in your community. So Natalie, do you want to unmute yourself and share? Oh, she said she typed a list. So I can read that out for folks who are on the phone who can't see the chat. But what she was saying is, you know, some of the challenges as a South Hadley resident are lack of affordable housing for families in particular, no first-time homebuyer assistance, lack of diversity in segregated neighborhoods, and a lack of accessible housing for people with mobility impairments. Thank you for that. And I also see Mary McClintock, you had noted housing for folks with physical disabilities is in really short supply. Mary, do you want to share more on that, what you're seeing?
Yeah, I have a friend who is, you know, has MS, has a landlord who's selling the house that she lives in, and is trying to find and has a Section 8 voucher, you know, has a voucher, and is both facing the trying to find something that's accessible enough, not like fully wheelchair accessible, but accessible enough. Mm-hmm. And also, because she lives on SSI, trying to navigate the HUD rules of housing vouchers and what's required, the SSI regulations about assets and different things, and then the tight housing market. And clearly, you know, I'm just that, you know, in the last couple of weeks, that and also a guy I know who's been homeless for the last few years has upgraded to being able to live in his minivan now, and has been on a waiting list for a voucher for several years, and is, you know, has no idea when that will come along. It's continuing to be in the minivan, and is and really could probably help himself move forward if he had access to retraining for a job that he's had in the past. And but there aren't funds to get, you know, it's probably $5,000 to do this training, which on one hand sounds like a lot, and on the other hand sounds like if some, you know, getting somebody into you know, it's actually tractor trailer driving. You can actually live in the tractor trailer while driving. That barrier. So I'm seeing just lots of complicated barriers. I also know 2 examples in the last few weeks of people from eastern part of Massachusetts retiring to buying homes in Western Mass, rural areas, to move out here and buying at above the market rate. I mean, above the asking price for a house. So this is not, obviously, this is not low income housing. This is up at higher end, but it pushes the housing, all the housing costs. And I'm feeling there was clearly a big movement from Boston, New York City after 9/11. And I'm feeling a similar situation now with COVID of people wanting to move out of city areas, and Western Mass is very desirable. And because housing values are higher in other places, being able to come in and pay sort of top price again keeps pushing it up. So those are some of the things. Also, one thing that's, I think, on the positive end, I'm on the Conway Planning Board. I also work for Community Action Pioneer Valley, and I'm part of the Small Town Housing Working Group that Alyssa LaRose coordinates at FERCOG. And I'm heartened to hear about CPA funds being used for rental assistance, and really hoping we can figure out ways for the little tiny towns. I mean, you know, the Conways and the Ashfields and the Warwicks and the smaller towns that may have CPA money or the other ways to help folks in the community. So that, anyway, thank you for
Thank you, Mary, for raising all of those, and you're echoing some of the things we've heard before and raising new issues. And I want to go to that last point that you made about local communities using funds to do rental assistance. That's a question that had been shared by a couple others. Anyone who has successfully created a local emergency rental assistance program? I know that Amherst has, John, but how can we get more municipalities to adopt a program like that? Any guidance from folks on the call that want to share? And yes, Katie Lacey, before we go, shared that MHP does have guidance on this, and we also hosted a forum back in April on how to create a local emergency rental assistance program. So there's a lot of great information out there, but how do we actually get it implemented? Gina, please.
Hi. I just want to say that one of the issues we ran into with a couple of Franklin County communities was the timing with town meeting warrant and just that process and where we are right now. We were able to work with Sunderland and get an application into the warrant with, you know, moments to spare. So that might be an issue, and I don't know if there's any way to waive that requirement in your town, but it's something to talk through. And Mary in particular, because I think that Brian has reached out. I'm happy to talk further.
Thank you, Gina.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else on that? Or I know that Corinne, you had raised this question as well. Corinne, do you want to say anything on what you guys are facing in Agawam?
Yes, 2 words: political will. That's what it is. Although I think I told you that Agawam did have a Black Lives Matter peaceful protest march, and the woman from town who started it, she had 699 comments on the website, and some of them were really awful, but a lot of them were really great. So now it's a matter of connecting with those people, which I printed out all their comments with their names so I wouldn't lose them. Because, you know, I believe that our mayor and planning director were on your call, Dana, and how long ago was that? And then the head of the council said, as they busily were working on the small business grants, well, you know, we're going to look at using CPA funds after. You know, the mayor and the head of the council, chair of the president of the council, and town solicitor agreed to wait. So, you know, they're waiting. So they want to wait and see how much money they get from state and federal government. And I tried to send them an email saying, look, we're going to need it all. Let's start now. Let's get some money into the hands of the smaller landlords, right? But I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I appreciate the work that you've been doing in Agawam, and I know we've been trying to help you think through who are the new stakeholders to bring to that conversation. It sounds like you're doing great work there. Some folks are saying, you know, local towns will have a special town meeting in the fall, so that's an opportunity. Absolutely. Katie also reminded me, I'm sorry that I forgot about this, that we did do a survey with DHCD and MHP of communities that have adopted ERA programs. That should be available by the end of this week. We are just finalizing that report and we'll be putting it out. We shared a list of the communities that either have adopted one or are exploring it, but what will be in there is contact information and details of each of those programs. So if you're considering a program in your community, you might be able to look at that and say, this might be a good program to mirror, or I can talk to them about how they were able to accomplish it. So stay tuned for that. That will be up on our website, and we'll also be sharing that widely. Any other questions? I'm trying to keep track of the chat here. I see. Oh, go ahead, Corinne, while you have the floor.
Thank you. So the governor's housing choice program to lower the number of votes required to change zoning, if that passes, when will it take effect? Because they're revitalizing our zoning now, and it's looking like it's going to be more of the same. So so when would it take effect?
Abhi, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So initially we were trying to get it done before the spring town meetings, but right now nothing. I mean, legislation other than anything related to COVID right now is moving extremely slowly, and so while we try for it to at least, get done before fall, our effort was to get it done like last year, but we will definitely be trying to get it done whenever possible. But I am not sure. I do not have a timeline on when it'll move forward, to be honest.
But once it's passed, how long does it take to become effective? Is it like the fiscal
Immediately. It should, if whenever it passes, it can take effect immediately.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to go to Gina. You had had a data question, so you feel free to go ahead and ask that.
Thanks, Dana. So this is about the data you shared earlier about rental payments due to COVID across the different income stratas. And so I had been using the National Multifamily Housing Tracker, which I have learned about through a CHAPA meeting. And the numbers there are quite different. I feel like they're probably different resources, but I'm just curious if you can speak either to why the difference, and the numbers you shared are much not better. So why the difference, and also to the trend, because I think that, as we're all talking about rent, we're wondering what the timing is going to really be like, and looking at the predicted ends of assistance and the moratorium. I'm just trying to get a clearer picture of what the rest of 2020 and early 21 is really going to be.
Without looking at both of those data sources, I can't speak to what the difference is, but I could go back to, I'm happy to go back to the folks at MHP and the Donahue Center who put together the data that I was sharing, and let you know where it came from, and see what we can do to compare and contrast and see what numbers, where that discrepancy might be coming from. So yes, happy to do that and happy to share with the group. Thank you for raising that. Great. I see, Mary, you have your hand raised.
Correct, thank you. One of the things about thinking about all these rental housing, rental assistance programs, I'm fairly tuned in to what resources are in the community, and I hadn't heard about some of these. And I know we really are going to need to get the word out widely. And one of the ways we can do that is through the Look for Help public resource directory that I coordinate for community action. And I've put the information in the chat about that. But I think one of the things, and I also coordinate something called the Franklin County Resource Network, which has got about 500 folks on a listserv. So I think all of us need to share not only do we need to know what all the different rental assistance programs are, which we'll get from you all, but then how we get the word out to people. Because one of the things that I think is, really clear is that while there were a whole bunch of people having a rough time before and they're having a rougher time now, there's a whole bunch of folks who are having a rough time now who've never had to think about any of this, accessing these kind of resources. And they're just not even, they just don't even know such a thing exists. So wanting to do whatever we can. So I put the information in the chat about the Look for Help public resource directory and the COVID-19 updates to resources section. That's used really widely by a lot of service providers, but also by the general public. And there's also,
I think this has come up on every single call that we've done. I know it's been the conversation from day one of this, is how are we making sure people who need resources are finding out about it. I'll just add a few additional things. So one is in the report that's going to be coming out about emergency rental assistance programs, Whitney, who spoke earlier, did a lot of looking at the programs that have already been approved and talking about how are they getting that information out. And she has some great thoughts on when you are creating a local program, what are the best ways to make sure people are hearing about it. I'll let her speak to it, but we've also talked a lot about how are we advertising it. So making sure you're putting it in the various multiple language publications in your community. We've had people leaving hard copies of applications at the post office or the grocery store or the food banks, really making it clear that if you're looking for assistance, come to us. And again, this idea that no door is the wrong door. So if someone comes to you and they're not eligible for that program, we're referring them over to something else so that no one gets turned away. Also putting materials in school, the free school lunches that a lot of communities are giving out, or the summer lunches. Whitney, anything else that you wanted to share in your research on this? What are some great ideas that you've seen?
Yeah, so just in terms of what some of the best practices we've been seeing different communities utilizing on their website is, one, they're making it very visible, right? Using color or different banners on their web pages, their home first page that you access, making it clear where folks can, about the opportunity, one, and how they can apply. The idea, like you said, Dana, where no door is the wrong door. So oftentimes there's an administrative agency which is actually doing the application and dispersing the resources, but there's a direct link, right, to their page on the community's website. The other piece, as you mentioned, is having it in various languages, right, so that it's accessible, and in a form as well online that is accessible, that is clear on how to answer what questions. The other piece about that is for folks who are unable, for various reasons, to complete the application online, it may be better for them to be able to print something or to, and to fill it out, having help or assistance or otherwise. So having something that's downloadable, having a phone number that's directly linked to someone who can actually help them if they have questions about the application or the application process itself. An email directly tied to how they can access that. So those are some of the best practices that we've been seeing online to make sure that the word is getting out in terms of making it accessible for all. So those are some, and then I think you alluded to the others in terms of where folks can actually find the application or the opportunity itself. It advertised in terms of where they're actually going. So bring it to them as opposed to waiting for them to find you. So.
Yes, thank you, Whitney. And I see in the chat someone was saying, Heather, that people are using Facebook, and sharing information on Facebook is huge. And also sharing it through your other channels. And I think someone had mentioned earlier, a lot of people who have never thought that they would be in an unstable housing situation are suddenly finding themselves in that. And so they don't know where to start. They don't know where to go, but maybe they are in a school group, or they're on the community Facebook page, or they're trying to find resources for food, just making sure that it's out there in any way possible. So thank you for sharing that. I'm trying to track in the chat. I can't tell if we have any other questions that weren't raised, but please feel free to raise your hand if we haven't gotten to you yet. Anyone else want to share? We've got just a couple more minutes before I'm going to close us out with kind of next steps on how you can stay engaged with us. I do see Deborah shared a COVID-19 resources page for the opioid task force. Thank you. Libraries are a great place for flyers. Thank you, Alyssa. I should also mention that CHAPA has a COVID-19 page. It's actually separated into two components. The first is really on policy and updates on legislation and ways that organizations can be accessing best practices, etc. And the other is really for folks who are looking for assistance, both housing, but also additional things. Thank you, Jenna, for sharing that link. Legal assistance has been a huge issue. Even though there is an eviction and foreclosure moratorium in place, there are still some people who are falling through the cracks on that coverage. So making sure that they know their rights, they know where they can go in order to make sure they can stay housed. So all of those resources are up on our page. So I'll leave it for one last call for questions. Otherwise, I will go ahead and share our last few steps here.
I just wanted to make a very quick point, Dana, around the good conversation around distributing information. So thank you, Mary, for raising that. I know that Gina and Amanda and others have been brainstorming how people can safely drop off forms, but the places that normally have been open for people to have access to the internet, like the libraries and printers and things like that, just don't exist right now. So I appreciate the conversation about how we can get this information out in non-digital ways. There's a real internet and connectivity issues in the North Quabbin, Franklin County region, and that's been a huge barrier. We're learning to people finding out what's happening.
We've heard in one of our, gosh, days all run together, but in one of our regional meetings, I think it was yesterday, our Berkshire's call, they have similar issues there. And they were talking about how many of the caseworkers from their various organizations have started having people call and helping them actually fill the form out over the phone, getting the materials to them, because again, the access issues were problematic, and also where would you print your materials, etc. So finding ways to connect with people and making sure that if they are eligible, someone can assist them in getting into it. I thought that was a great idea. So might be something to think about for this region as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and just walk us through our last few pieces here. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate all of you sharing. I will be sharing the PowerPoint slides on our website as well as all of the materials. So just a last little plug about how you can stay engaged in this conversation with us. You can join a CHAPA committee, as Abhi talked about. We have a lot of them, and they're all meeting virtually right now, which actually means for some of you, it's easier to get to a meeting than driving into Boston to our office. So we've seen a lot of great participation, and that's one of the benefits of being virtual. We've really appreciated having that increased engagement. You could attend one of our forums. We have several that are coming up, and we've been recording all of them so that they can be shared on our website. So we've mentioned both the establishing a local emergency rental assistance program webinar and the one on RAFT. Both of those you can find on our website. We also are having our CHAPA annual dinner. It will look a little bit different this year, but save the date for October 21st to join us to celebrate all of the great work that everyone's been doing in a very, very hard year to operate. And lastly, if you go to our website, you can do most of those things. You can also sign up to receive monthly housing briefs. You can engage locally with us, as Whitney was saying. There's a link on our website to tell us where you live. We often know where many of you work, which is wonderful, but where do you live? Are there other people in your community who are trying to do this work? We can try to connect you up with them and make sure that you are doing that in your local community as well. And you can also become a CHAPA member. So I'm just gonna check the chat here and make sure there weren't any additional comments, which looks like we are all set. So I just wanna say thank you once again to Bank of America for sponsoring, and to all of our co-hosts for speaking here, but more importantly for the work that you all are doing in your communities at this moment. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.